So there are three things that the Apostle Paul is bringing out to this first century church of Corinth. They are doubtful, they are discouraged, and they are being deceived. I believe the same threats that the early church was undergoing is the same threats that we undergo here today. We struggle with doubt, don't we? We struggle with discouragement, don't we? And definitely we just struggle with being deceived. So what do we do when we have doubts? Well, I love that the Apostle Paul writes this in verses 1 through 2. Hey, I want to remind you of the gospel that I preached to you. When you're doubting, you need to be reminded. So where do doubts come from? Well, I spent a significant amount of my ministry career in young adult ministry, and what I've found is true with what you've seen in reality is that most high school students, they graduate from high school and tend to graduate from their faith, and what happens is they end up in a collegiate environment, and they think that their atheist professor is more intelligent than their pastors, teachers, and leaders. And the assumption is that atheism is a more intellectual approach to a worldview, and that is a false dichotomy. That is a false assumption. Because how many of you know that there are atheists that are less intelligent than Christians? And how many of you know that there are Christians that are less intelligent than atheists? Right? There are atheists that are more intelligent, and there are atheists that are less intelligent. There are Christians that are more intelligent, and there are Christians that are less intelligent. So perhaps I submit to you today that doubts don't come from the amount of thinking, they come from the lack of thinking. Doubts don't just come from the amount of thinking, they come from the lack of thinking. I'll prove it to you. Let's just say I go to the doctor. I have a thing, I have to go to the doctor. And the doctor says, Kelly, if you eat red meat again, you will surely die. So congratulations, the world just received a new pescatarian. So I walk out of the doctor's office and I'm saying, you know what, doctor, I believe you. I submit to the authority of what you just diagnosed. I am no longer going to eat red meat again. I believe you. And I go home, and 30 minutes later, I get a phone call, and it's my friend Mo. And he's having a birthday party at a Korean barbecue restaurant. And he knows how much I love that bulgogi. And he's like, Kelly. I'm like, Mo. He's like, come on down to, KBQ. And I'm like, I can't. My doctor said I'm going to die. He's like, well, you should come anyways. We're all going to be here. We love you. And I'm like, and I'm thinking to my head, I'm like, I don't have to eat the red meat. They have panchan, which is like pickled, potatoes. And pickled potatoes and some radish and some onions. I could eat the panchan. And so I'm like, you know what, Mo? I'm going to go to KBQ. And so I go to KBQ with Mo, and I start smelling the smells. And the panchan is looking less appetizing as the meat gets passed on. And I smell the sizzling red meat. And I see how much other people are enjoying their quote-unquote freedom. And you know what happens? I start to doubt whether or not my doctor knows exactly what he's talking about. I mean, after all, I was just eating red meat a couple days ago. I mean, what does he know? He's probably never been to this Korean barbecue spot. So what's happening? Am I doubting because of the amount of thinking or because of the lack of thinking? Something else is going on, don't you know? It's the lack of thinking that is happening here. It's called rationalization. And that is what is happening to the early church. And I submit that's happening to us today. Right? This church is going through doubts. And Paul sends them a letter to remind them of what they believed. The second thing that is happening to this church is that they are discouraged. Anybody? Just don't raise your hand. Right? They're discouraged. It's been 35 years since Jesus resurrected, and the last thing he said is he'll be back. Well, no, Jesus showed up. But you know who did show up? A bunch of other people knocking on my door, forcing me to renounce my faith, or else they're going to kill my family. That's what was happening in the first century church. So were they discouraged? Yeah. Were they losing their jobs? Yeah. Were they losing their families? Yeah. Were they losing their life? Yeah. It's a discouraging time. And then the third thing that's happening is that they were being deceived. See, in the first century church, they still had to deal with the idea that there is an afterlife to begin with. See, you remember hearing the religious leaders, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, right? Well, the Sadducees, they came against Jesus, and the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, and so therefore they were sad, you see. But they were very powerful. They were a powerful religious group that made it very difficult for people to believe in the resurrection. Now, when Jesus rose from the dead, they had a problem. And so you have these people walking away from traditional Judaism and becoming Christians. And now you also have, on the other side of this cultural tension, these Romans, these Greco-Roman people. In fact, they're Roman and Greco philosophers that are teaching about the resurrection as well. You know what they're saying? They don't believe in a bodily resurrection. They only believe in a spiritual resurrection, somewhat similar to that term that you might have heard called a Christ consciousness. They didn't believe in a physical resurrection. They thought the body was evil. But what we know about the resurrection and what we're supposed to believe about the resurrection is what the disciples believed about the resurrection. And they had a very multi-sensory experience with Jesus. I mean, after all, they ate with him, they walked with him, they talked with him, they poked his belly. No, Thomas stuck his finger in the wound of Jesus. So this is a multi-sensory experience. And what Jesus was proving to humanity is that he was the prototype of what the resurrection was supposed to be experienced, which means you are all going to die, no surprise, but you will rise again, physically and spiritually. That's what the Bible teaches. And you talk like that in public, people think you're crazy. But the reality is, that's what Jesus taught. That's what the disciples believed, and that was what was being handed down. I want to say one more thing about deception because it's so rampant. Every religious group that postures itself to being Christian, like Jehovah's Witnesses or LDS, or even Church of Scientology, all of them have the same thing in common: hidden knowledge and hidden power. They're all selling you hidden knowledge or hidden power. See, when it came to Joseph Smith, he claimed to have these golden plates that only he had access to, and his followers are just kind of believe that. Or when it comes to the prophet Muhammad, he believed that he had divine revelation that he actually received, that his followers are meant to just believe. It's hidden. But that's not the case with Christianity. See, the gospel is a very public thing. It's investigatable, and there's eyewitnesses. See, this Christian thing, this resurrection of Jesus, is not something that was whispered in a corner. It's not something that was hidden in a cave. It was very public. And it was eyewitness, and there's historical data to back it up. And so, if you're here today, I want you to ask yourself, are you here? Are you following Jesus because of the facts, or are you searching for a spiritual experience? Are you letting the voice of culture shape your view of reality? Or instead, are we believing the things that Jesus and the disciples made crystal clear? That Jesus came, he died, he rose from the dead, and he was witnessed by over 500 people. So let's look at the evidence together. How about we do that? That's number 2, the evidence. Verse 3 says this: "For what I receive I pass on to you as of first importance." What importance? What importance? First importance, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12, and after that he appeared to more than 500 of the apostles. And lastly, he appeared to me. So, I printed these cards. You can go ahead and grab them, touch them. They're nice and glossy. I made sure they're thick paper. And these are the 5 top reasons for the resurrection. Because I don't think it's as easy to remember what they are. But of course, not only is it written here in the Bible, but it's also confirmed in history. And I wanted to make sure that you had a piece of paper to put on your refrigerator or on your mirror or on your screensaver so that you can memorize what these 5 things are. And we're going to talk about these 5 things. But let's go through the 4 things. So it's 4 things of Paul, 5 things from Kelly, okay? So let's talk about Paul first, and then we can talk about Kelly's stuff later. Sound good? Good. All right. Number 1, Christ died. Why is it important that Christ died? Have you ever thought about that? Well, the reason why it's important is that Christ has to be both God and man. He needs to be both God and man because you are human and you offended God. And if God is offended, that's bad for man, right? If God is offended by you, that is bad for you. So you need somebody in your place to represent God to satisfy the debt that you owe. So far, so good. This principle is called the federal headship principle. Can you say federal headship principle? Okay, the reason why we need a new federal head is because our first president of the humanity existence failed miserably and decided to make God really angry. You know who the first president of humanity is? Good. So he decided to go to war with God. That's bad for us because, if God is at war with us, that means anybody who's born under Adam is an enemy of God. And I use that language very deliberately because we understand that when we're talking about different nations, right? So if, another nation goes to war with us, they regard everybody in this country as an enemy of that nation. You guys get that? That's called federal headship. Man, woman, child, animals, they're all experiencing the benefits of the leader, and they also experience the not so beneficial parts of that leader. And we were under God's wrath because we had a leader who went to war with God, Adam. But God in his great mercy, we see this in Romans 5:18. It's so wonderful and beautiful that he sent another leader, and his name is Jesus, right? In the book of Hebrews, he's called the second Adam, right? So under his rule and his reign, we get to experience the benefits of being friends with God. So far, so good. Okay, so that's called the federal headship principle. That's why we needed Jesus Christ. So why did we need him to die? Why couldn't he just rescue us like Liam Neeson in Taken, just boom, saved, right? Certain set of skills. So why does Jesus need to die? Well, that's another term called substitutionary atonement or penal substitutionary atonement. Penal means penalty. Substitute means we swap. Atonement means we're good. Okay? And the reason why you need to know this term, and I cannot teach you any term less, is because I'm trying to equip you. And if I were a gym coach and you were a gymnast, anything less than teaching you what a triple salchow is going to be unhelpful. Ice skating, there it is, thank you. Triple salchow in ice skating, right? This is how penal substitutionary atonement works. There was a story of 2 Chinese brothers. One Chinese brother was younger, kind of wild, kind of rebellious. He liked to drink a lot. And he had an older Chinese brother who was somewhat responsible. He was a little bit older, but, close in age. Now, one day, the younger Chinese brother was at a bar. He got into a bar fight, and he ended up killing a guy, right? He just broke a bottle, stabbed him, dead, right? And then he got blood all over his clothes. The bartender was like, oh, man, you just killed somebody. And so the younger brother runs away, and the bartender calls the police. Well, the police are now chasing this younger Chinese brother, and he makes his way all the way home, takes his bloodied clothes off. His older brother sees what's happening. He's like, oh no, what happened? And then the younger brother just goes and hides. Now the older brother knows that the younger brother is about to get, captured by the police. And so what he does to save his younger brother is what? He puts on the bloody clothes. That's right. And so they take the older brother off to jail. The judge says, you're guilty. And he goes to jail for the younger brother. Well, while he's in jail, there is a huge jail prison riot. And in the middle of that prison riot, guess what happens? the older brother gets killed. And so the younger brother hears about the older brother and goes to the judge because he's so guilty. He's so sad. And he says, "Oh, judge, I was the one who was supposed to go to jail, not him. Take me instead." And the judge says, the payment for the sin, or the payment for the punishment, or the payment for the crime has been satisfied already. There's nothing to be done here. Leave. That's penal substitutionary atonement. And that's why Jesus had to die for you. Because the crimes that humanity has committed against God, we were a part of that. And unless it gets paid for, we would have to face the eternal debt, the eternal punishment that we deserve. But Jesus took it in your place as an older brother. He put on your unrighteousness so that you can put on his righteousness. Does that make sense? Christ died in our place. The second thing, he died for sin. Or the third thing is that he died for your sin. Now, Jesus just didn't die for a good cause. He didn't die because he was leading a rebellion. He didn't die because of just unfortunate circumstances. He actually died deliberately for your sins, and we need to understand them. And then the next thing we see here is that he was buried. That's what Paul says. This statement, when we get to verse 3, the Greek translation kind of changes from Paul's language to creedal, like document language. It's kind of like when you're reading legalese. When you know what legalese is? When you're like trying to sign a contract and, it's no longer a text message from a buddy. It just sounds like, I, the participant, write thee here, It's kind of like legalese. What Paul is actually doing in this particular moment is that he's quoting one of the earliest creedal statements that was in circulation in the early church within 3 to 5 years. This is really important for you to know. You know why? Because you're going to be on YouTube or Facebook or TikTok, and somebody is going to say, "Oh, the Bible is a bunch of myths written thousands of years after it happened." And you could just say, this is written 3 years after. In fact, the book of 1 Corinthians was written 35 years after the resurrection. Right? That is way too early for a myth to even take place. And in fact, Jesus is one of the most historically documented people in all of history, even more so than Caesar Tiberius. You guys are like, who is Caesar Tiberius? Well, Caesar Tiberius is a bad guy, but he's one of the Caesars that ruled and reigned during Jesus' time. Now get this, there's more historical documents that support the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus than we do have of Caesar Tiberius. And I guarantee your atheist friends believe that Caesar Tiberius existed. Okay, so he was buried. And then lastly, that Paul claims, is that he was raised from the dead. Okay, being raised from the dead. That's where most people have a problem, right? And so that's why I wrote these 5 things. Jesus lived. Here's the thing. The Bible is an accurate historical manuscript. Actually, 66 different books, over 40 different authors written over the course of 1,500 years. And it's reliable, which is a miracle in itself. They're all saying the same thing about Jesus. But if you needed to give evidence outside of the Bible about the historical claims of Jesus, I've given you 4. Tacitus, Josephus, Clement of Rome, and Ignatius. These are 4 historical authors that give claim to the life of Jesus Christ. That's number 1. Number 2, Jesus did die. He didn't swoon. Have you heard the swoon theory? Is that he just got crucified and the pain was so bad he just passed out and they thought he was dead, and then they buried him in the cool of the cave. He just woke up just refreshed. It's like, oh, okay. Right? That is one of the theories. Or the other theory is that, the disciples just hallucinated. They all took a bunch of shrooms the night before. They're like, this is so depressing. Oh, take a bunch of shrooms. Jesus rose from the dead. Everybody believe us. That's another theory that seems improbable. Right? I mean, if somebody says, yeah, it was just a hallucination, you can say, that seems improbable. For 500 people to experience the same thing at the same time, right? It's probable for one person, but improbable for 500 100 people. Okay. That Jesus died on the cross. Now, Jesus died on the cross. Romans, they just did this well. Like, they were just really good at killing people. Like, there's nobody ever in all history that has ever survived their Roman crucifixion, especially after they've added flagellum to the equation. See, Rome didn't invent crucifixion. The Persians did. But in 6 BC, that's when they perfected crucifixion. And they added this flagellum experience. It's called flogging, and that was when you beat somebody half to death. And we use that term half to death to actually explain the half-life of what is taken from a person when they're beaten with a flagellum, right? That was actually called a half-death, and that existed to ensure that they actually did die on the cross, because they just didn't want this to take too long, right? They just wanted it to be over in a couple of days. It smelled, these are bodies, and it wasn't really high off the ground. It was actually just above eye level, so that anybody who's walking by could see that this person is an enemy of Rome, and you just don't mess with Rome, or else this is what happens. That's the whole point of